He thought he'd found a lost puppy. A year later, he was stunned to discover what it really was. Dogs are often seen as some of the most loyal and loving animals you can bring into your home. Once they become part of a family, they treat it like their own and will do anything to protect it. On top of that, they're incredibly cute and can bring loads of comfort and joy to the people who care for them. That's exactly why Ezra loved dogs. He would go out of his way to help one in need. Ezra Toons, 27, lived in a quiet village out in the countryside. It was a small, peaceful place where everyone knew each other, and neighbors were quick to lend a hand if someone needed help. Ezra had lived there his whole life. He was born and raised in that village, and his family had lived there for generations. He loved everything about it, but his favorite part was the forest that bordered the edge of town. He couldn't even count how many times he'd wandered through those woods with his childhood dog. That deep love for nature and the forest never faded. And even as an adult, Ezra often found himself heading out for walks, sometimes after a long day, other times on a quiet weekend when he had nowhere else to be. He never went alone, though. His Doberman Dobby was always by his side. Ezra had gotten Dobby as a puppy, and they had bonded quickly. The two were inseparable. One sunny day, Ezra and Dobby were out on their usual walk through the woods. The weather was perfect, and everything felt calm and peaceful. Now and then, Ezra would throw a stick for Dobby, who'd bolt after it and race back, tail wagging, eager for another toss. But after one throw that sent the stick further than usual, Ezra paused near a small stream to wait. Minutes passed, and Dobby didn't return. Strange, since the dog was usually quick and never wandered off for long. Worried, Ezra began calling for his dog, hoping Dobby would come bounding back through the trees. But when there was no answer, he started walking in the direction Dobby had run, his heart sinking with every step. He kept calling and searching, but there was no sign of the Doberman. Thoughts of old hunting traps or wild animals raced through Ezra's mind. He finally gave up and started heading back to the village, ready to gather help. Dobby meant everything to him, and he couldn't just leave him out there alone. But just as Ezra was nearing the edge of the forest, he heard a sudden rustling in the bushes beside him. He froze in place, worried it might be a wild animal getting ready to pounce. The bush rustled again. Curious about the noise, Ezra stepped closer and peeked into the bushes. To his surprise, it was Dobby, stuck in the middle of the thick branches. But what caught Ezra off guard even more was that Dobby had something in his mouth. Quickly, Ezra helped free his loyal dog from the tangled brush. Once Dobby was out, Ezra crouched down to see what he was carrying. Gently, Dobby placed the object on the ground in front of him. Ezra stared in disbelief. It was a tiny puppy. The little thing was clearly just born, its eyes still shut tightly. Ezra felt a wave of awe wash over him as he carefully picked up the fragile creature. He couldn't believe something so small and helpless could be so adorable. There was no way he could leave it out there alone. Ezra knew right then he'd bring the puppy home and care for it himself until it was strong enough to maybe find a forever home with another family. The first few weeks were exhausting. Ezra had to set alarms every 2 hours to feed the puppy using a small syringe. On top of that, he had to give it a special milk formula made to replace what it would have gotten from its mother. As the days turned into weeks, the little pup began to grow fast. But as it grew, Ezra started to notice something strange. It didn't look like any kind of dog he'd ever seen. No matter how much time he spent searching online, he couldn't figure out what breed it might be. Still, it didn't really matter to him. He loved the pup anyway, and so did Dobby. The Doberman made a point to be nearby during every feeding and would curl up next to the tiny puppy in front of the fireplace each night, keeping it warm and safe. One day, while Ezra, Dobby, and the little pup, whom Ezra had named Pipsqueak, were playing inside the house, something unexpected happened. Pipsqueak suddenly scrambled up to the top of a tall bookcase like it was nothing. Ezra stood there, stunned. That kind of climbing wasn't something you usually saw in a young puppy. That moment made him pause. Maybe this little guy wasn't a dog after all. Wanting to get a real answer, Ezra booked an appointment with his local vet. He figured someone who worked with animals every day might finally help him solve the mystery of what Pipsqueak really was. On the day of the appointment, Ezra gently placed Pipsqueak into a small animal carrier and headed off to the clinic, nervous but curious. Once they were in the exam room, Ezra told the vet everything. He explained how Dobby had found the tiny creature in the woods and how he'd raised it since it was just days old, making sure it was safe, healthy, and loved. The vet listened carefully, then began examining Pipsqueak. After a few quiet minutes, the vet finally smiled and gave Ezra the answer. It turned out that Pipsqueak wasn't a puppy at all. He was actually a baby ferret. The vet explained that ferrets can be a bit tricky at times and sometimes nip, but they can make great pets too. What happened next, he said, was entirely up to Ezra. Back at home, Ezra opened the carrier and let Pipsqueak out. Dobby rushed over right away and began licking him all over, clearly happy to have his little friend back. Watching the two together, Ezra realized there was no way he could let Pipsqueak go. Dobby had clearly formed a strong bond with him, and to be honest, so had Ezra. He also knew that Pipsqueak had missed out on learning important survival skills from his mother. Things like hunting, avoiding danger, and finding food, skills a wild ferret would need, had never been taught to him. Since Ezra had raised him by hand, the little guy had grown up more like a house pet than a wild animal. Because of all that, Ezra knew there was really only one place that felt right for Pipsqueak, home with him and Dobby. And honestly, they couldn't have been happier to have him as part of their little family. What a heartwarming story. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life tales just like this one. Want more right now? Head over to the channel for even more amazing stories.